There is no AIDS epidemic in the United States. There is no AIDS epidemic in Africa. There is no HIV disease epidemic in Africa. It is the biggest fraud in medical history and the most harmful.
This is an AIDS dissident, someone who questions the theory put forth in the mid-1980s that HIV, a retrovirus, causes AIDS, the suppression of the immune system. Why does this person passionately believe that the current explanation for AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, is wrong? If a virus does not cause AIDS, then treating patients with highly toxic antiretroviral drugs may have been what killed thousands of AIDS patients instead of HIV.
I want you to have an opportunity to tell this audience worldwide, we have more than 154 countries tuned in right now, take us through the paradigm of AIDS and HIV and why it should be challenged.
The HIV concept is totally corrupt, totally bankrupt, and totally empty. AIDS and HIV are separate phenomena. HIV is testing. That's where HIV exists. You test people and you tell them they're HIV positive.
T cells. T cells was the word of the day. Oh, their T cells are declining.
They never actually proved that the virus attacked and killed these cells, and after 30 years, they still haven't proved that.
I'm looking for the evidence. I've contacted the CDC, the NIH, Health and Human Services, who believe that HIV attacks cells and causes AIDS, but they can't produce any evidence.
AIDS is anybody who's severely ill who you consider to be at risk for AIDS.
The medications have the same effects that they claim the virus does.
We need other people who are qualified to examine the evidence to take a close look. AIDS would be exposed as a fraud in 24 hours.
A lot of time and money has gone into it. Reputations are at stake.
But HIV/AIDS is probably the most serious violation of scientific ethics today.
What AIDS dissidents argue is that HIV was never proven to cause AIDS, and that scientists who do believe it was proven have only agreed on the correlation between HIV-positive test results and illness. But as dissidents point out, there is a core scientific principle that correlation does not equal causation.
The fears that we're projecting out to people, be afraid of this deadly sexually transmitted virus, took over through the news throughout the world. So that's what it's all based on, the fear.
AIDS is an immune deficiency, and there are many reasons for such a condition besides HIV. In fact, some of the drugs that are prescribed to treat HIV cause the same symptoms that would define an AIDS patient.
If you take away the fear and just look at the science, it's a whole different story.
So in January of '86, they were mandatory testing all military recruits. So I had to take the HIV test. I had chickened out at the last minute and decided I was going to tell them I was gay so that they wouldn't allow me in the Navy. And they told me that, well, you're not only gay, you're also HIV positive. You have 5 years to live and you need counseling for your homosexuality. And they sent me out the door. Had I taken those meds back then, they would have killed me and I would have never gotten to be where I'm at today.
I tested HIV positive in 1997, but I took the dreadful AZT. It's in a new camouflage called Combivir and Nevirapine, which is Viramune. I took the cocktail for 6 years. And I felt like my organs and everything were in pain, and I did suffer like neuropathy, and was diagnosed with acute anemia by one HIV specialist. But today it's different. It's like all subsided because I stopped taking the drugs.
The film crew for this documentary attended the 2012 International AIDS Conference in Washington, D.C., to see how the only AIDS dissident at the conference was holding up against the mainstream.
Follow the money, and you'll see where the numbers, the cooked books come from. You'll see where figures lie and liars figure when there's $1 to be made out of it.
Science has as much politics as the political world, if not more. If you look at HIV, it's the only virus in the world where the president of France and the president of America had to sign an agreement as to who discovered the virus, because there was a scientist in France and a scientist in the States that both claimed they had discovered HIV.
The co-discoverers of HIV, one of them is Robert Gallo. He was found guilty of scientific misconduct over his research in 1993. Congress reviewed it. He was kicked out of the National Cancer Institute.
When Robert Gallo discovered human T-cell leukemia virus 3, now known as HIV, linking it to AIDS, he called a national press conference even before having his theory peer-reviewed or published. But it turned out that he had not discovered a new virus at all, but had appropriated a retrovirus sample sent to him from France by Dr. Luc Montagnier and simply changed the name from LAV to HTLV3 and taken credit for it. In fact, Dr. Gallo was later charged with scientific misconduct for not giving credit to Montagnier's team for the discovery.
Francois Barré-Sinoussi was the professional colleague of Dr. Luc Montagnier, who at the Institut Pasteur in the early 1980s was claimed to have isolated what was later called the human immunodeficiency virus. On this side of the Atlantic, Dr. Robert Gallo was doing similar research at the National Cancer Institute. Both of them had been trying for a dozen years to show some relationship of retroviruses, which were discovered and newly identified around 1970, as having some relationship to cancer. They couldn't do it. They had wasted 12 years of work.
Scientists say a retrovirus is a virus that contains RNA instead of DNA. RNA and DNA are similar in makeup but have different functions. Retroviruses use the enzyme reverse transcriptase, RT for short, to convert their RNA into DNA and then plug themselves into our cells' DNA. The retrovirus is now part of our cell. AIDS experts claim that RT is a process unique to retroviruses, in spite of the fact that it occurs naturally in the normal cells of yeasts, insects, humans, and other mammals. According to Dr. Peter Duesberg, one of the pioneers in this field, there are many retroviruses that live in our DNA and are harmless. In fact, 8% of our body's DNA is composed of retroviruses, which do not kill the cell they infect, including the CD4 T cell that HIV uses to survive.
They do not kill the cell in which they replicate. That would be suicidal for this mechanism. It's a harmless passenger.
There was a guy called Luc Montagnier. He was in France. A guy called Peter Duesberg and a guy in the aviator glasses called Robert Gallo. And they were looking for a virus that would cause cancer.
And so all these people who are virologists were getting lots of money to prove that cancer was caused by a virus. But cancer is not caused by a virus.
It goes back to the 1960s, 20 years before AIDS came on the scene, and a scientist from NIH named Bob Hubner recruited me to look for retroviruses, which we called RNA tumor viruses then, thinking these might be important agents in relation to cancer.
In 1976, Robert Gallo thought he discovered the first cancer-causing retrovirus, and he named it HL23V.
He found he found reverse transcriptase. He's learned to stimulate cells to get a high spike of RT. So you seek and you shall find. Look what you know. I'm looking for this. I'm going to find it. I found a virus. It is soon revealed by his colleagues that the virus was really a mixture of samples from 3 monkeys. This isn't kosher. You're not supposed to do this. This isn't a virus. You mix some stuff from 3 monkeys. And he walked away in shame. And actually what he said, very important, was it was a mistake, These were contaminated in the lab.
Gallo himself admitted that HL23V was a disaster. He later claimed discovery of 2 more human leukemia viruses, HTLV1 and HTLV2, neither of which could be found in patients with leukemia.
There was none of these infectious retroviruses causing cancer in humans until finally one was found, HTLV, human T-cell leukemia virus, in 1980. And it causes about 0.1% of all the lymphomas in the world. So it's not a highly prevalent virus.
0.06% of people who test positive for HTLV1 got leukemia. To this day, it's considered a fact that Robert Gallo discovered the first cancer virus, not HL23V, the three-monkey thing, but this.
Gallo had already identified several of these so-called retroviruses. He had HTLV1, HTLV2, and then HIV was HTLV3.
How curious that scientists changed their focus on retroviruses as the possible cause for cancer to now being the probable cause of a new syndrome, AIDS, that was showing up in the gay epicenters of America. The war on cancer had failed, and retroviruses needed a new disease. When AIDS came along, their cancer funding conveniently rolled over to AIDS funding without a hitch.
So, Montagnier does this research. They say they have isolated a retrovirus that could potentially have something to do with this new gay disease. Gallo was emphatic. I found the retrovirus. It causes AIDS. No question about it.
HTLV1 causes leukemia, but modifications of the envelopes, it can give some immune deficiency. Okay? And it's transmitted by blood and sex and mother to child and targets CD4 T cells. So when a new virus came along, we thought it would be a relative of HTLV1. Well, we thought it would be a brother. It's not a brother, it's a cousin. Okay? So the idea was that. The data when we said it is a retrovirus came from a lot of virus detections, a lot of virus cultures, and a lot of antibody data on the blood test. And then we said, this is obvious. Okay? This new retrovirus is causing disease.
Cancer is a disease which causes cells to grow. But HIV is a disease in which cells die off. These viruses, which one day they said cause cells to grow, and the next day they said cells were dying from the same type of virus. If you have a particular virus, the virus has to do one thing. It can't do multiple things because it's very little genetic information. So either the virus is causing cells to grow or the virus is causing cells to die. But it can't at the same time cause cells to grow and cause cells to die.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First, the probable cause of AIDS has been found, a variant of a known human cancer virus. With the blood test, we can identify AIDS victims with essentially 100% certainty.
AIDS is an acronym that was designed specifically for HIV, and it stands for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. I want my patients and people to know that being HIV positive is the beginning of the same disease, and AIDS is the end of the same disease. It is the same disease.
Those with AIDS are infected with HIV, but people infected with HIV do not necessarily have AIDS.
I don't have any dispute that AIDS is real. I have had friends who died of AIDS, but the question is whether or not HIV is the cause of AIDS.
AIDS is an incurable disease that is the end result of infection by the human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV.
The health risks always correlate to the symptoms that the people have, not HIV. You have people with HIV and without HIV, supposedly. Sometimes the one gets sick, sometimes the other does. Sometimes the one doesn't, sometimes the other doesn't. There's no consistency with the idea that you're HIV positive and then you get sick and die.
I came across Koch's postulates. This presumably was the way that medical scientists would decide whether a germ causes a disease, although in recent times, it looked like the kind of thing where a scientist might use it if it looked good. In other words, the results were what he wanted, and would ignore it if the results didn't come out the way he wanted.
Traditional scientific logic calls the steps needed to prove that a microbe causes a disease Koch's postulates. According to Koch's first postulate, to see HIV as the cause of AIDS, the HIV microbe would need to be present in every patient who has the AIDS syndrome. The definition of AIDS has changed over time and differs in different countries. Using Gallo's lax standards, HIV could be isolated in less than half of patients with either Kaposi's sarcoma or opportunistic infections, the original AIDS diseases. Yet the definition of AIDS was changed to rely on the presence of HIV antibodies. In Africa, an AIDS definition was devised based on symptoms alone, since antibody tests were for the most part unavailable. These symptoms of African AIDS bore little resemblance to American AIDS. They were characteristic of many diseases prevalent in tropical countries where malnourishment and unsanitary conditions exist. Since 1993, Americans can be diagnosed with AIDS with only a low T-cell count plus a positive HIV test. But T-cell counts don't always correlate with the state of people's health. So even healthy people were diagnosed with AIDS and added to the statistical count.
There's a wide variety of diseases or non-diseases in which the CD4 cells can be low. So because they never did wide-ranging population studies, we don't know what the range of those tests really measure.
Dr. Nancy Turner Banks points out that T cells were never studied in a wide population range to see whether or not there are low T cell counts in healthy people. Since the machines that count T cells have not been standardized since the 1970s, the results of a T cell test are questionable in diagnosing an AIDS patient. There are many different types of HIV tests, but the most popular ones in America are the antibody tests ELISA and Western blot.
If you have HIV in your blood, your body will make antibodies. The ELISA checks against those antibodies. The Western blot will check the actual proteins that are specific and only happen with HIV. Because sometimes an ELISA test could be positive, a false positive, and it could be for some other virus that you've had, even a common cold.
The accuracy of both ELISA and Western blot has been consistently overrated. Over the past 20 years, I've searched the scientific literature and I've found over 100 different factors and conditions that can cause false positives. Rheumatoid arthritis, hepatitis, or even something as common as vaccinations can make you test HIV positive.
I needed something reproducible, fast, global. Blood test is that. Scientists all over the world could do it. And I said, without the blood test, you don't know you have HIV until you get AIDS. So how could we follow the epidemic?
Antigens are foreign invaders that cause the immune system to produce antibodies that fight them off. The antibodies come in shapes that correspond to the shapes of the antigens, theoretically likened to the way a puzzle piece fits together with another puzzle piece. The ELISA test is looking for antibodies in the blood that are supposed to match up with HIV. Unlike a jigsaw puzzle, antibodies and antigens don't have to be an exact fit in order to produce a reaction. A loose match is enough, so antibodies that don't match up with HIV can still give a positive result on the ELISA.
The more antibodies a person has in his blood, the more likely it is he will test positive.
A false positive HIV ELISA, they call it, enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. Results can be caused by alloantibodies resulting from transfusions, transplantation, or pregnancy. If you're pregnant and you take an HIV test, you can just be positive. Malignancies, cancer, alcoholic liver disease, you drink, you can be HIV positive, or, my favorite, for reasons that are unclear.
So once there's a suspicion with an ELISA, then it's confirmed with a Western blot, because it checks for certain proteins that are only found in the HIV virus.
The Western blot, or the confirmatory test, is supposedly more accurate, but in fact it looks for something that 20% of humans already have anyway, even if they don't have the virus. There are many types of antibodies that don't belong to HIV, but they still cause the test to give a positive result.
High levels of antibodies tend to show up in what are called AIDS risk groups. Specific groups such as gay men, IV drug users, hemophiliacs, and blood transfusion recipients. Traditionally, AIDS cases were found almost exclusively in such groups. That's where you find the vast preponderance of both AIDS and positive antibody tests.
It's not a matter of having HIV antibodies, it's a matter of having enough different kinds of antibodies to multiple different things.
Really, they use polyreactive, non-specific tests. They use tests that come up positive for all sorts of things. These ducks might test HIV positive if you gave them a test. Dogs test HIV positive. Mice test HIV positive. I'm not joking.
In Africa, a lot of the children have measles, and they virtually stopped doing the HIV test on kids who have measles because the test was almost always positive. Some of these diseases that were so-called AIDS diseases actually were cross-reacting with this antibody test. Over time, they began to realize, especially in a low-risk population, that most of the positives were false positives.
Koch's second postulate is that the microbe must be extracted from the diseased organism and grown in pure culture. In other words, it must be isolated as its own entity.
The virus can only grow inside cells. The virus can't grow anywhere but inside cells. So the virus has to get inside a cell. The cell is the soil for the virus. The way you isolate them, by and large, is you get those appropriate soil in a dish as a culture. You add whatever your source of your virus is, and if the virus is there, it'll spread through those cells from one to another, and then you can measure it by different assays. That's how you eventually isolate the virus.
The Pasteur Institute's guidelines for the isolation of retroviruses require that cell culture products be spun in a centrifuge to band identical particles at a precise density. This is called purifying. Because cellular debris is known to band at the same density as retroviruses, this purification must be confirmed with an electron microscope image. Further particle analysis is required, and the particles must prove to be infectious.
HIV has never been isolated. Its assumption has been postulated only by indirect means.
If you start like this, you take the blood from an individual, you hope whatever causes the disease is there. You can take an electron microscope of the blood.
To prove that Gallo had isolated the retrovirus he called HTLV3, he had to have taken an electron microscopic image of the virus as material from the 1.16 gram per milliliter density gradient in his test tube.
That study was never done. And the person who was the electron microscopist at that time actually wrote a letter to Dr. Gallo and told him that he had not isolated.
A properly isolated retrovirus is a field of particles with similar shapes and sizes. However, the electron micrograph images of what is said to be HIV show particles that vary so greatly in size and shape that they don't resemble those of any other isolated retrovirus. Though overlooked by Dr. Gallo, Professor Montagnier admitted that despite all their efforts, they weren't able to purify the cultured material so that it contained only HIV free of cellular debris. In 1997, electron micrograph pictures of HIV published in the Journal of Virology showed contamination with non-viral cell fragments referred to as MV microvesicles. The small number of retrovirus-like particles that did show up in the photos did not meet the rigid size requirements for retroviruses. They were either way too large or way too small. A purified sample of HIV should look like this, but instead it looks like this.
Yes, the virus has been isolated. The virus and many different types of viruses, because there's some different mutations of the virus. So that part of the science has really advanced quite a bit.
So you think it's not necessary to begin with a purified sample?
No, not at all. It's really past techniques. We are now in the world of modern molecular biology, and everything has changed.
The grounds for proper isolation of a microbe is a topic of intense controversy between defenders and dissenters of the virus AIDS hypothesis. According to Papadopoulos Eliopoulos, if what is said to be HIV has never been identified as a unique entity, there's no way to tell whether the proteins used in HIV antibody tests are from HIV or from the other cellular components in the sample.
No one has isolated HIV in its pure state. Any isolation that they talk about has always been with cellular debris. No one has ever seen pure HIV without any cellular debris. And that means there's no gold standard. There is no measuring stick for HIV. No one has ever seen it. It always has static in it. It always has interference, cellular debris.
There was no science. There was no cause-effect relationship. There was no proof. There was no isolation, nothing. They found an enzyme, reverse transcriptase, and then they picked 4 proteins for a test.
HIV stands for Human Immune Deficiency Virus, and it is a virus that attacks humans. The reason we call it that is because there are similar viruses that attack non-humans, especially chimpanzees, right? And it's related to this.
The third postulate is to give the same identified disease to a healthy animal by injecting the microbe in its purified form into the host.
You extract a germ from his body that you believe is causing him to be ill, and you go over there where you got a bunch of animals, chimpanzees, whatever, and you give them this germ. They all get sick. Okay, that seems to be indicative. With HIV, total failure. They had a bunch of chimpanzees locked up for years and years and years, and I checked in with one of the main guys who keeps track of all these chimps. Basically what he told me was they're not getting sick. They've been injected with HIV, but they're not getting what researchers would call AIDS.
HIV-2 is a variant of HIV said to exist naturally in African monkeys in the form of SIV, simian immunodeficiency virus, which does not make its natural host sick.
SIV is a large family of these retroviruses that occur naturally in non-human primates.
So how long do you think that these monkeys have had those?
Eons.
So they've been getting sick from...
The African monkey doesn't get sick. It carries these viruses without getting sick. The chimp doesn't get sick. The sooty mangabe doesn't get sick. You can't even make them sick. How hard if you try? But even though they have this virus in them, but if you take the virus from them, at least from the chimp or sooty mangabe, and cross species into macaques or humans, certain strains took off, and that's what made the disease we call AIDS.
And people are very, very different. Some people have a response to the virus that it is very rapid that they get sick. Some people take a longer period of time.
If you're a researcher, a scientist, and you have the HIV in front of you, and you try to test if this virus produces the symptoms of AIDS and so all this crap that they say, you would still have to wait, what, 10 to 20 years? How is it possible to run a test like that?
Animals that are SIV, CPZ positive may not live as long as animals that are free of the virus. There may be a reduction in CD4 cells.
But they don't have a severe disease. One chimp had to be observed for 10 years, and one sooty mangabe was observed for 16 years, and then they show little hints of AIDS-like disease, but they don't go on to have the full-blown flamboyant disease that was wiping out humans.
Where's the evidence of this so-called virus after 30 years? There's not one illness I've ever had, except for hemophilia, which I was born with. The only thing I have is maybe a common cold, which I fought off. I don't have anything.
The fourth postulate is to recover the microbe from the newly infected host.
If you look at the actual data, the statistics, the numbers of the thousands of healthcare workers that have been followed over the past several years, and the hundreds of needle stick injuries that have occurred and splash injuries to the mucosal surfaces, the chances of getting infected with HIV from a contaminated needle that you stick yourself with or a splash injury is less than a fraction of a percent.
Robert Wilner was a PhD, MD, and ND naturopath. He went around the world injecting himself with blood from HIV people. Some years later, he died of a completely non-related heart failure, not an HIV-related heart failure. Throughout his experience, he directly injected himself from the blood of people who were positive, documented positive. He never turned positive.
Fauci said he's going to have to stick himself 300 times to transmit the virus. 300 times to transmit a virus? You cannot have an epidemic under those circumstances. If you can't transmit it by blood, you certainly can't transmit it sexually.
If you go back into the history books or ask your doctor what it means if you get a positive result for herpes or hepatitis or any of the others on an antibody test, you'll be told that you've tested for a prior exposure. There's a huge difference in having an active infection and being told you were exposed. So people took antibody tests and told they had active infections. In fact, they tested for exposure.
PCR, polymerase chain reaction technology, can detect tiny amounts of DNA by making millions of copies like a Xerox machine until the scientist has enough to work with. This technology is the method used for counting the viral load in HIV patients. PCR was used in the O.J. Simpson trial to detect O.J. Simpson's DNA as evidence in the murder of his ex-wife. Dr. Kerry Mullis, the inventor of the PCR technology, says PCR is not to be used as a measuring device, only a detection device. So using it to count how much HIV virus is in a person's blood can result in serious numerical mistakes.
The traditional test is something called an HIV antibody. Maybe that's negative, but something called an HIV viral load would be positive.
It multiplies something that's so minuscule that eventually you could see it. And that's what the viral load is. Now, they're using the numbers, but Kerry Mullis says that they're misapplying his technology. It is not a measurement device. It's a detection device. Yes or no, the numbers are meaningless. But, you know, who's he? He won the Nobel Prize for the technology.
He said, if you need my method to find the enemy, you're in pretty good shape. There's something wrong. A fragment of a virus that cannot be isolated, only amplified.
So they're using his technique for the wrong thing.
Absolutely.
PCR is very sensitive. PCR can pick up tiny little bits.
The PCR test can detect virus if somebody was infected in the last 7 days.
Though the manufacturers of the PCR test say it should not be used to diagnose patients with HIV, doctors still use it to measure the patient's response to HIV medications to see how much the medications are lowering their viral load.
And that's how we know whether the medicines are working. Because if somebody has a very large HIV PCR, you put them on medicine and within 6 months, that'll go down to undetectable.
I've been non-detectable since I've been on medication.
So when the drugs are doing their work, are they really suppressing HIV, or are they just suppressing normal cell activity?
There is no scientific justification for any of these AIDS drugs. They're all based on invalid surrogate markers, viral loads, and T cells.
Over the past 10, 11 years, I've been undetectable with a good T cell count. So I feel that the combo therapy works, and sometimes it works for a while, and then you try something else. But it's amazing how many options and alternatives we have today.
I have 4 children. My oldest was a senior in high school. I didn't tell any of them about my status. I had meningitis, and they knew was that I was recovering from meningitis. So that was my mask. to keep me from telling them. And because I came so close to dying, I wanted them to know that I was going to be okay. And this was after I was on the medication, and that was why I waited.
I was 10 when I found out, and my brother was probably like 12.
This is what an AIDS patient looked like in 1981, but not anymore. Today, someone with AIDS is an unlucky victim of a positive antibody test. Long before AIDS appeared, ordinary people occasionally got diseases like meningitis or toxoplasmosis. Now, if the patient happens to test HIV positive, they become classified as having AIDS. An HIV-negative person with exactly the same clinical symptoms would not be diagnosed this way.
I've been a sick person in terms of being asthmatic and living with allergies, allergic to chocolate, the outdoors, you name it. Since childhood, that it was inevitable that when I tested positive, it just was an extension of that.
I missed more days of school than I attended in like 7th grade or so because of illness. I had a tendency to get ill when I was a young person, too.
You know, there really is no question this is the cause of AIDS. We don't understand all the pathogenesis steps along the way, but you don't get HIV, you don't get AIDS.
Whether they are use of recreational drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, extreme emotional stress, transfusions, pre-existing illnesses, there's just all these other health risks that explain thoroughly why people get sick. You don't need HIV to explain it.
I've studied this. I think it was the original explanation, which was multifactorial causation. 3 parts to that. Number 1, gay men in the late 1970s, a dozen years into the sexual revolution, were spreading around old pathogens historically unprecedented.
People were expressing themselves more, coming out of the closet more, and going to bathhouses and sex clubs, engaging in anonymous sex, unprotected.
They were having sex with numbers of people that's beyond your imagining. I'm a child of the 60s. I am pro-sex. I think sex is good. But when someone says I had 2,000 different sexual partners in a year, that's shocking.
I got exposed to cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr virus, probably syphilis and gonorrhea. Gay men were being told through the gay media to find a gay doctor because we had unique health problems.
Anal sex makes the immune system of the receiving partner more open to possible invaders. Foreign proteins and pathogens, as well as immunosuppressive semen, can enter the blood via the rectum, which disturbs the balance of bacteria as well as T cells in the gut. During the 1970s sexual revolution, gay men engaged in practices such as anal douching and shower shots in order to prepare themselves for anal sex.
Look up the shower shot online. If you're a gay man and you're the receptive partner, you're going to go into a bathhouse, you're going to go online, and you're going to be told that you have to stay clean. You're going to take a high-pressured hose from your shower, gently insert it into your nether regions, turn on the water, and get ready for sex. You're washing out your gut. Ouch. It's not good for you.
Dozens of gay men.
Tony Lance's gut dysbiosis theory of AIDS states that such practices tore the fine lining of the colon, leading to interference with the precious microbiomes in the gut, their immune systems.
The biggest source of your immune cells is actually in your GI tract, in your intestinal tract. And those T cells are constantly fighting a battle with what you're exposed to by what comes into your GI tract.
Anal douching, lubricants, and overuse of antibiotics also killed the good bacteria, or probiotics, in the gut, along with stripping away the mucosal lining, which in turn interfered with the proper manufacturing of T cells.
When you destroy your intestine, you no longer single production of T cells. And the T cells are signaled by all of the healthy bacteria that you make. You make vitamins, you make short-chain fatty acids. If you ruin this, you have a leaky gut, you have a porous gut.
Having a damaged intestinal wall or a leaky gut could cause frequent infections, bowel diseases, colitis, and autoimmune diseases.
1987, only receptive anal genital contact had a significantly elevated risk of HIV infection. Douching was the only ancillary sexual practice that contributed significantly to risk of infection.
But in our groups, we began to notice that the men getting sick were the bottoms. They were the receptive partners. And the people that they were having sex with, who were the insertive partners, weren't getting ill.
It has to do with behaviors. There are an awful lot of gay men who are not anal receptive, who are not at higher risk than many heterosexuals, simply because that's not a risk for them.
Another terrible thing that interfered with the microbiome was the practices called fisting, or putting toys into the lower intestinal tract. That also could tear the fine lining of this mucosal membrane. That could then allow fecal matter to get back into the bloodstream and cause blood poisoning.
Originally, one of the possible explanations for why gay men were getting sick was that it was sexually transmitted. There was a rationale behind that. It was because it was correlated to these men in the gay bathhouses, and they were having all this sex, so it was natural to think, well, maybe sex has something to do with it. But there became this bias around 1983 and 1984 to just believe it's all sexual transmission, and all of the other health risks, I think for political and emotional reasons, were pushed aside and then no longer discussed.
In a historically unprecedented manner, we were using all kinds of toxins, from recreational drugs, alcohol, cocaine, amphetamines, poppers, nitrites, all of which were immune suppressive, to fuel a party lifestyle.
In this extreme party environment where people are going many, many hours, many days of the week, many weeks out of the month, not sleeping, not eating, just partying themselves to death.
I had friends that did more drugs than you could even imagine. And, they're dead now, but...
Did you do any of those drugs?
I tried poppers once. I didn't like it. It gave me a headache.
I did poppers in the 70s, yeah, and 80s, and even in the 90s I did, yeah.
In 1987, Peter Duesberg published a paper in the journal Cancer Research, doubting that HIV had any impact on the failure of people's immune systems. He theorized that recreational drugs were the true cause of AIDS.
So I learned more then about Dr. Duesberg's work, that the primary cause of AIDS is drug usage. It's this inundation of chemicals that the body was never intended to have, that now it's flooded with, that have evoked immune responses, because that's what the immune system does. One of the main things it does is it responds to foreign invaders, which is anything that's not supposed to be there.
Poppers became the nickname for the class of alkyl nitrate inhalants, once prescribed as amyl nitrates to people with angina. They loosened patients' blood vessels and relieved heart pains. When these patients used poppers as medication, they didn't use the drug that often. Once the sexual revolution took its course in America and Great Britain, gay men began to use the drug with increasing frequency. Many of them used poppers to relax the anus and facilitate anal intercourse. Poppers were ubiquitously used in bathhouses and gay nightclubs in the 1970s and early 80s, to the point where the smell of the inhalants permeated the air. Gay men started getting sick with infections like pneumocystis pneumonia and blood affections such as Kaposi sarcoma in the early 80s after about 10 years of abusing the drugs.
But they're taking poppers so they can have more sex, but it does it by artificially affecting the blood vessels. So what a surprise. The first item that brought people to discover AIDS was Kaposi sarcoma, a cancer of the blood vessels.
It was back in 1981, probably in around January or February of that year, I saw a young man in my office with Kaposi sarcoma, a healthy young gay fellow who was otherwise very healthy except for purple spots on his skin. And prior to that episode, I had not seen any Kaposi sarcoma in young men. It was a disease that is a fairly rare, benign or indolent kind of tumor that had been seen mostly in elderly men of Eastern European or Mediterranean origin. About 2 weeks later, I saw another young man, similar kind of background, and had Kaposi sarcoma lesions, but more extensively distributed all over his body. This suddenly made it very surprising for me to see these two cases so quickly in a disease that I had only seen before maybe 3 or 4 times in my entire career. Over the next 2 months, I accumulated 20 cases of Kaposi sarcoma in gay men in New York City.
Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Dr. Michael Gottlieb had also discovered unusual cases of illness in gay men.
The first patients that we came across with AIDS had pneumocystis pneumonia, which is a pneumonia that's only found in people whose immune systems are very suppressed. And what we did was we reported the first 5 cases of AIDS from anywhere in the world.
In 1981, Dr. Michael Gottlieb coined the term GRID, Gay-Related Immune Deficiency, an unofficial name later to be changed to AIDS.
In the early 80s, some of the medical practices that were in primarily gay areas and had a lot of gay clients started to see some things happening over and over in many different practices with many different patients. They were seeing Kaposi sarcoma, they were seeing pneumocystis pneumonia, which you'd never see.
Everybody I knew in the beginning who had the KS and had the PCP, they all had a little bottle of poppers in their pocket. A lot of them had them on their night tables or in the hospital. They would do poppers.
I was usually so drunk at the time that it was just something different to do on the dance floor or during sex to enhance the sex.
When Dr. Peter Duesberg's work became more known, the homosexual community in various leading publications began to put the word out to stop using poppers. And there was a dramatic decrease in the escalation of AIDS.
Remarkably, to this day, we don't see Kaposi sarcoma very often, as much as we did in the early days of the AIDS epidemic. And from 1981 to 1990-92, the incidence of Kaposi sarcoma, even among gay men, did diminish in number considerably, even before we developed antiretroviral therapy for AIDS.
I do think, basically toxicology is at the heart of AIDS. But on the other hand, you simply cannot tell someone from his earliest sexual awakenings that he ought to die for a form of love without this affecting his health.
A lot of gays became very self-destructive in a society where you were rejected and told basically you were a mistake that never should have been born.
Why were we stressed? The religious right was raising its ugly head, calling us evil, sinful. We were horrible people. Many of us were not out to our families. We were stressed.
As a suicide attempt survivor, there was a lot of hopelessness going on during the years when I was coming out as a gay man and living in a homophobic world and living with this virus. My last attempt happened after I was positive, and the other ones were in my youth and while I was in college.
In the last 4 or 5 years since my diagnosis, I can attribute things that I had as a health challenge as clearly a result of stress. I changed jobs. Shortly after I changed jobs, I came down with Bell's palsy. I certainly deal with it outside HIV and AIDS diagnosis.
So, old pathogens, toxins, and stress, all 3 of those things together, that's what caused immune deficiency. A subset of gay males had their immune systems collapsed. They were open to all kinds of diseases.
Linda Steiner was a middle-aged white lady who was in a relationship with a black man for 6 years, having unprotected sex with him on a regular basis. She was not in a risk group for testing positive, but took an HIV test after breaking up with this man. She believes it was the stress from her breakup out of the 6-year relationship, while having to keep afloat the restaurant business she started with him, that caused Linda to become ill. Her positive result was mysterious to her because her ex-boyfriend actually tested negative.
I had a lot of stress in my life at the time. I think my immune system was definitely compromised at that time, and that's probably also what led to the PCP.
The illness most associated with AIDS, pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, or PCP, was identified several decades before AIDS came into existence, and to this day is found among HIV-negative cancer patients receiving chemotherapy, HIV-negative organ transplant patients, and HIV-negative people suffering from protein malnutrition.
Both times I got really sick, I think I could make a case for having had malnutrition, not eating enough protein and probably just not enough calories in general. And I did, after prolonged periods of time, develop thrush.
They noticed that everybody who had these infections had low T cells. So they figured that it was something they acquired. That's how the name came in, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. They just hadn't identified what was causing it. They assumed it was a virus.
Those with AIDS are infected with HIV, but people infected with HIV do not necessarily have AIDS. A person has AIDS when their T cell count falls below a measurement scale of 200, as opposed to the 500 to 1500 in a healthy person.
The T cell count is very important, especially in the HIV patients. We look at helper and suppressor cells. These are all the important components of how your body fights off things.
T cells are not always good indicators of health. They are cells involved in the regulation of the immune system.
T cells can go up and down, roller coaster throughout the day, every day.
The T cells are known to vary in number throughout the day, depending on the amounts of hormones in a person's body.
And CD4 counts decline with age. That's another thing that you'll hear.
Mature T helper cells express the surface protein CD4 and are therefore referred to as CD4 T cells. HIV supposedly lowers the immune system by infecting and killing off CD4 T cells. Clinical laboratories testing AIDS patients count the T cells from the circulating or peripheral blood, but the majority of T cells exist in the enclosed sections of the body, like the bone marrow, and standard clinical tests do not look at these.
In a clinical lab, they want to know how many total T cells or CD4 cells are circulating in the blood. So there's a difference in the way these results are reported clinically and the way they are looked at in a research lab.
The immune system is made up of circulating, we call them peripheral blood lymphocytes, but also lymph nodes where T cells and B cells are kind of contained in an organ-like area. The spleen is a lymphoid organ.
Only 2% of the lymphocytes are in your bloodstream at any one time because the lymphocytes do their work in your intestine, in your bone marrow, in your spleen. This is where most of your immune function takes place. And so that means 98% of your CD4 cells are never in your bloodstream.
I changed medicines because my T cells would go up and down here and there. At one period, for about a year or so, my T cells got down to just 2. But during that period, I never stopped working 12, 14 hours a day. And when the doctor told me I had 2 T cells, I didn't know. I was amazed.
Jonathan Barnett has been HIV positive since 1998 and does not believe that his positive result means he is infected with a deadly virus. He does, however, believe in the correlation of a low T cell count with the poor health he's experienced over the years. He sees the HIV paradigm as a huge mystery, but he doesn't want to risk losing his life as he has seen several of his friends do. So he's been taking low doses of AIDS medications to control the steady decline in his T cells.
Another group of well-known dissidents reached a point in their health where they felt like they had no choice but to take the ARVs out of desperation. These people are still alive. Does that mean I believe HIV is a virus that causes this? No, it doesn't. So as a community, we were already dealing with health issues that the heterosexual community was not being targeted for.
And it wasn't until a study came out in around 1989 that indicated that there was value in a person knowing their status and then starting prophylactically on HIV medication so that they didn't have to wait to develop symptoms, and that doing that, it seemed that you could prevent yourself from getting sick. And I thought, well, that makes sense, so I'm going to go ahead and get tested.
Approximately 80 to 90% of the new AIDS cases in the United States are not from illness, but from CD4 T cell counts. It is such madness to start feeding these toxic chemotherapies to people who have no presenting illness, which is what we've been doing for the last 15 years. We killed them with the drugs, not with some mysterious pathogen.
My feeling is if everybody was told that there are top scientists who question whether HIV causes AIDS, that they are told that these drugs they're taking could cause fatal side effects, that very few people would take the drugs.
The prescription drug AZT is a metabolic poison that, when given to a healthy person, would cause the same symptoms as found in a clinically defined AIDS patient. Some well-known people who have died within a year after starting AZT include Kimberly Bergalis, Freddie Mercury, Arthur Ashe, Rudolf Nureyev. Did these people die from HIV infection or from AZT poisoning? Others, like Magic Johnson, have avoided AZT and have lived far beyond expectations.
One morning, I woke up, I picked up the bottle, went into my bathroom, and dumped the whole thing. And I probably saved my life.
They attack the cells who are reproducing the fastest. So when you take the drug, you're better because maybe you have tuberculosis or toxoplasmosis. The drug also kills all cells who reproduce fast, so also the bone marrow cells. The bone marrow generates the immune system. So it's circular because they kill the infections, but they make you more prone to contracting new infections.
I don't believe I would be here if I kept taking that drug, because it was totally destroying bone marrow.
AZT was a holocaust. It was not an experiment where a few people suffered. It's going to go down in history as one of the biggest genocides caused by false scientific theory.
I've had doctors tell me that had I taken AZT back in 88, 89 when it was originally prescribed to me, that I'd be dead today. And I know that's a fact.
Jessica and John Stranges are both HIV positive. Jessica tested positive once as a teenager and again after becoming pregnant with baby Dominic. John was an intravenous drug user in Italy, but always tested negative in Italy for HIV until he came to the United States and tested positive after dating Jessica. Jessica agreed to take intravenous AZT while pregnant to prevent HIV transmission to her baby. Now that the baby has been born, the baby is testing negative, but the parents still have to give him AZT until he tests negative 2 more times, or Child Protective Services could take the baby away from them.
I was left with a choice right there. I remember what happened to the Nagels and everything, the baby Rico. And just for my own satisfaction, I told the infectious disease doctor, if we decide against the AZT, are you going to send the SWAT team to my house with a social worker to take my kid at gunpoint? You know what the guy told me? Well, I won't, but I can't guarantee that someone else won't. He was already online with a social worker getting stuff prepared in case we declined the treatment. We both decided to, just do it. It was more of a legal decision than a medical decision.
People wanted it sooner, but I was very worried we'd kill people because they were so immune deficient that we're going to give them drugs that have some toxicity. They have all kinds of problems, sometimes cancer, always lots of infectious disease.
AZT itself was a good beginning and really helped, and I think it was the clamor to get something to control this. People were dying so quickly.
Now the difference, of course, in 1982, 83, 84, 85 to now is now we have therapy.
They will tell you that yes, we got off to a slow start, but by 1987 we had the first treatment, AZT. What they don't tell you is that treatment ended up killing tens of thousands of people, mostly people who weren't even ill, but who had simply tested positive for HIV.
People were just dropping like flies, and something told me to stop the AZT, and that was the only thing that was available at the time. It just seemed toxic, and we took it around the clock.
We know early on people were getting heavy doses of AZT that probably were heavier than they needed, but it was an attempt to get it done, and let's get something.
So they killed tens of thousands of people, and then they reduced the severity of the drugs. They reduced the doses.
The definition of AIDS brought more people in so that we knew where they were. ARVs came in 95 and less people died. And as a result, more people are living with HIV without a diagnosis of AIDS.
The years of 1987 to 1995, when AZT was given to every single person who tested HIV positive, are the exact years of the highest deaths that are blamed on HIV and called AIDS. Once they lowered the dose to either non-toxic, non-immediately toxic dosages of AZT or removed AZT from the treatments, the rate of death came down to current levels, which is actually today very low.
In 1995, when antiretroviral therapy came into effect and more people were being treated, we saw a very large decrease, thank goodness, in the death rate.
They gave her 3 bags of AZT during labor, and as soon as they started the injection, boom, she needed 3 blood transfusions. My son, the same thing. They started the AZT by IV. All of a sudden, he goes into critical condition and he needs a blood transfusion because that stuff is destroying his bone marrow and he's going very, very highly anemic.
Who would in their right mind give AZT to a baby? This is how sick these people are. It's almost as if they've been protected by law and allowed to murder babies.
Since he's been back from the hospital, he's been screaming all night, and he was bloated up like this. One night, I'm not giving him that AZT, and he's doing fine. But still, the recommended medication is AZT for newborns or women in labor. It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, would you expect a physician who prescribed one of these toxins that he would admit he's given somebody iatrogenic illness, that means doctor-induced illness? No. He would be sued in a minute if he admitted he was poisoning you. So they just keep their head in the sands. And now doctors want to feed this chemotherapy to people who are HIV negative. That would be comparable to me going to my doctor, getting a handful of antibiotics before I go to the bathhouse on Saturday night to protect me from the bacterium. It's medical malpractice for doctors to even consider giving highly toxic chemotherapy to people who test negative. This is how far this madness has gone.
If you have a drug and it's really toxic, and you say that it's going to help people, but the drug makes you vomit and have constant diarrhea, and you give it to people who have constant diarrhea because they don't have any clean water, how are you helping them?
I had very strange digestive things going on. I had a hard time eating without sort of regurgitating the food. I think that there was something in these drugs, I don't know whether it was AZT or one of the other drugs, that did something to my body or to my immune system that just made it hard for me to live without the drugs.
After about 10 to 14 days of use of this regularly, your body equilibrates, or it gets used to this new psychotropic drug and it accepts it. And at that point, it's like an alcoholic. You then start using to ward off the withdrawal syndrome. So, the HIV drug Sestiva, the same thing happens. You start using the drug, it takes 10 to 14 days with a certain dose. Eventually you become addicted to it and you don't notice any difference. But withdrawal syndrome then produces symptoms that are remarkably similar to the symptoms that AIDS clinicians use to identify the onset of AIDS.
The protease inhibitor cocktails today are antifungal, antibacterial, and antimicrobial, so they do damp down the condition. They're not necessarily killing a virus, in fact they're not, but they're kind of damping you down, damping down your inflammatory state.
Some people don't experience a response to their CD4 counts when they're on ARVs, but most people probably do.
It went all the way down to like 40 at one time, CD4. Now they're about 500.
I can't explain. I hate the drugs. I don't want to take them. I don't believe that there's a virus that's causing AIDS, but they do something.
The drugs do something.
The drugs do something. And that's measurable and it's noticeable.
But it's variable because, there's certain people whose T cells are 80 and you put them onto meds and they climb all the way back up to 800. And there are other people whose T cells, let's say, are 200 and you put them onto medication and you suppress the virus and the T cells don't move. So it really depends on the individual and there are no hard and fast rules.
They put me on Sestiva and Truvada. Within 2 months, I was undetectable. I gained 20 pounds. I felt like I was very healthy and everything. I think it actually saved my life because the doctor told me that if I didn't start that medication, that it's quite possible I could have been dead a few months later.
People were on antiretroviral therapy, and so people who were literally at the brink of death had HIV reduced in their bloodstream, so they were able to start to live again.
Sometimes there are cases where a person is initially helped, but that may be just because if they had an infection, sometimes these medications will kill those bacteria, fungus. Also, these medications kill off all the healthy cells, the lining of the stomach and the intestines and the nervous system.
A new type of medication, protease inhibitors, came out in late 1995, where they were introduced along with various other medications. Doses of AZT were greatly lowered or even eliminated, leaving dissidents to point out that less AZT equaled less poison, resulting in longer life. However, with the new cocktails, patients started suffering from bodily disfiguration and dying from liver failure, a direct result of medication toxicity.
In order for anything to reproduce, it needs DNA. So the HIV virus has to find a host that has DNA. The HIV virus finds the T cell, it spits the RNA into the T cell. It then uses nucleoside transcriptase to change that into DNA. It then binds it, replicates, you make more DNA, it changes it back to RNA, and out comes a new virus. So that's a very complicated series of steps, right? The protease inhibitors work in one of the final steps. Once you have new DNA and the virus is about to bud out, it has to form a protein coating that basically makes it a virus. The protease inhibitor, inhibits that final step. So that's how the medicines work. They actually interfere in many different of these very many steps that have to happen.
Protease inhibitors are attacking the proteases of your own body. They think that they only attack HIV protease. They conveniently forget that protease is found in the human body, aside from HIV, for instance, in the digestive system.
There's something called lipodystrophy, which is really a syndrome where people lose their body fat. And that's typically an advanced thing, but it can be from the medications, and sometimes HIV itself play as well. So it's a bit of both, the medications and HIV. People lose their buccal fat pads in the face, and then they can also get abdominal distension.
Once you know you have HIV or AIDS, then the doctor will recommend the client or the patient to take the medications. But if the client doesn't want to take the medication, most likely his lifespan is not going to be very long.
One of the common side effects of AIDS drugs is liver failure. The main cause of AIDS deaths is liver failure. Is this merely a coincidence?
The medication, it's all toxic to your liver and your kidneys. So people don't die from having HIV, they die from the side effects of the medication.
Is that more often that they die from kidney failure or liver failure than they actually die from HIV?
Right, because the medication is very toxic.
Scientists at the National Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta today released the results of a study which shows that the lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer.
Investigators have examined the habits of homosexuals for clues.
I was in the fast lane at one time in terms of the way that I lived my life, and now I'm not.
The best guess is that some infectious agent is causing it. Today, researchers here at the National Centers for Disease Control said they had found several cases where people who had been sex partners both had the condition. The scientists say this probably means they are dealing with some new, deadly, sexually transmitted disease. The investigators see this as a serious public health problem.
Many people thought that gay men getting sick and dying was a good thing. I'm sorry to say that, but that was the environment. So if the government wanted to do anything around this rare disease, they had to make it homogeneous. They had to say everyone's at risk. The CDC could not link this to any other group without finding a common denominator. So they noticed hemophiliacs had immune disorders. They noticed that IV drug users had immune deficiencies and disorders. These was historical. They claimed this was the same thing happening with gay men. Well, they all had immune deficiency, but for different reasons. To lump them all together and say that it was one common cause was an intentional fraud.
As a hemophiliac, I'm a victim of what I call a mass murder, in which I was diagnosed approximately 1987. Virtually all hemophiliacs died after diagnosis within 2-3 years. So they had a higher antibody reactivity than the normal person. So they were not infected with anything. There's no retrovirus that causes AIDS. At that time, it was more like a witch hunt. They imposed a test. Virtually every hemophiliac that took the test came back positive. And then they started pushing the AZT and other toxic drugs immediately. And it was only through my mom's own wherewithal and knowledge not to take any toxic drug because I was healthy that I lived.
Government officials thought that if a virus caused AIDS, it would contaminate the blood supply and AIDS would turn up in hemophiliacs. They had higher antibody reactivity because factor VIII, the clotting factor that hemophiliacs needed to stay alive, was contaminated with foreign proteins and many viruses such as hepatitis B. Regardless of HIV status, hemophiliacs developed opportunistic infections and pneumonias, but didn't develop the same conditions seen in gay men, such as Kaposi's sarcoma, wasting disease, lymphomas, and dementia. Factor VIII was finally purified in 1987, giving hope to hemophiliacs for greater health. But doctors began to put HIV-positive hemophiliacs on the new wonder drug AZT with toxic and even lethal results.
Remarkably, people who acquire HIV by intravenous drug use or by blood transfusions never develop Kaposi sarcoma. It was exclusively seen as a side effect or a symptom of AIDS-related disease in gay men. Which has always been suggesting that there must have been some other factor that might be playing a role.
Never been on drugs, or HIV drugs, pharmaceuticals, and I've remained healthy.
Emery Taylor never did drugs, not even poppers. He was only a social drinker. So how could he have come down with Kaposi sarcoma, a disease now even mainstream scientists say that HIV does not directly cause?
I went to the clinic and told them that I was HIV positive and needed treatment, and they tested my blood. And they called me back 2 weeks later, and they told me that they could not determine that I was HIV positive, but they did know I had hepatitis B.
We found a naturopathic in Clifton. He says, oh, wait a minute. Are you alcoholic? And Emery's like, well, no, I'm not. So he's like, well, your liver enzymes are extremely high. You really almost have no liver function whatsoever. I can give you something to help you out, but you really need to get to a specialist, that's going to help you. And that was the only thing with Emery and I, is that he just did not want to do any medication. He just thought, okay, this will cure itself.
Billy believed it was untreated liver problems that led to Emery's Kaposi sarcoma.
Probably like about 6 weeks before he died, then he started getting signs of KS. And he died based on his hepatitis not being treated.
Even though Emery was a gay man with Kaposi sarcoma who ended up dying, his death does not prove that HIV causes AIDS. It is still up for debate on what caused this rare disease to pop up in gay men. But mainstream doctors today believe that the human herpes virus number 8 is the cause of Kaposi sarcoma, even in men never diagnosed with HIV.
In the 90s, we discovered that HHV8, human herpes virus number 8, or Kaposi sarcoma-associated virus, was the probable cause of Kaposi sarcoma. And for some reason, that virus must have been transmitted by homosexual activity and not by intravenous drug use or by blood transfusion or blood products.
Kaposi sarcoma was originally one of the hallmark diseases of AIDS, but later AIDS researchers insisted that Kaposi sarcoma was not caused by HIV. If HIV causes AIDS, then how is it possible that the original hallmark of AIDS is not caused by HIV? Much of this documentary was shot at the 2012 International AIDS Conference in Washington, D.C. This was the first time in 22 years that it was held in the United States. A ban on allowing HIV-positive people into the country had finally been lifted because the Centers for Disease Control had taken HIV off the list of communicable diseases of public health significance. Nicole Zwirin, the director of this documentary, became aware of this through seeing an interview with investigative journalist Celia Farber on Gary Null's program on the Progressive Radio Network.
Here we have it. They are essentially saying, what is that saying? Let's just be as absolutely fair as we can to the U.S.
It's not infectious.
The CDC determined that while HIV infection is a serious health condition, that's murky right there, but it is not a communicable disease that is a significant public health risk. What we need to get is a source from the U.S. government to address this.
For Nicole Zwirin, this source was Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, and the most visible government PR person for the AIDS epidemic.
I'm Nicole from Los Angeles. I have a question for Anthony Fauci. The CDC removed HIV from the list of communicable diseases of public health significance in 2009, and I wanted to know what the reason for that was.
I don't think that's happened, ma'am. I'm sorry, but that is that has not happened. Sorry, you got that one wrong.
Okay, final question.
Okay.
The CDC published a final rule in the Federal Register on November 2nd, 2009, entitled Medical Examination of Aliens, Removal of Human Immunodeficiency Virus, HIV Infection from the Definition of Communicable Diseases of Public Health Significance, HIV Final Rule.
Where are you from?
From Los Angeles.
And who do you represent?
HIV or Live. It's an independent website.
In 2007, during an interview for the documentary House of Numbers, Luc Montagnier, the Nobel Prize-winning co-discoverer of HIV, stated that HIV can be eliminated from the human body within a few weeks with a good immune system.
Totally antithetical to what the HIV/AIDS establishment in the United States says. Once you got the virus in your body, you've got it forever. Montagnier was saying no, that's not true. Natural immunity can take care of it.
We can be exposed to HIV many times without being chronically infected. Our immune system could get rid of the virus within a few weeks if you have a good immune system. And this is the problem also of African people. Their nutrition is not very equilibrated. They are in oxidative stress, even they are not infected with HIV.
I'm very anxious to ask Francois Barré-Senoussi what she thinks of her colleague Montagnier's view that the body can eliminate HIV from itself in a few weeks.
Nicole Zwirin tried asking Francoise Barré-Senoussi about what Terry Michael was wondering, but Senoussi cut her off, knowing that the question was going to be something she did not want to answer.
Can I ask you one question? Yes. What do you think about what your colleague Luc Montagnier said about being able...
No, I will not answer. I cannot.
Okay, thank you.
His assertion in that interview that the immune system can handle HIV is clearly incorrect, and the caravan has moved on. I don't think it's worth quoting him in any circumstance except perhaps to do a story about him or the continued existence of people who don't think that HIV causes AIDS.
I'd now like to open up the floor for questions.
My question is for Dr. Barré-Sinoussi. Your co-winner of the Nobel Prize, Dr. Luc Montagnier, said we can be exposed to HIV many times without being chronically infected. Our immune system will get rid of the virus within a few weeks if you have a good immune system. Why do you agree or disagree with him?
Difficult for me to comment on my colleagues, as you can imagine. However, personally, I think the innate immunity is certainly something to consider. When you are exposed to HIV, it depends to the amount of the virus that you are exposed. It's not only depending only of whether you have a good immune response or not. It's also depending also of your genetic background. So there are a series of factors.
There is a small percentage of people whose genetics have a way of handling HIV better. It is by genetics and it is by chance. If my hand is a cell, and my knuckles are molecules on the surface of the cell, HIV needs to interact with certain molecules on our cell to get inside the cell. Well, some people are born and suffer no consequence without having one of these molecules. And so HIV can barely infect them.
Keith Magoo was a gay man who had always been the so-called top in his sexual relationships with other men, but changed to becoming a receptive partner when meeting his boyfriend in 1997 at the age of 34. He was a raw vegan and took tons of health supplements, but his daily routine left him with few hours of sleep as a construction worker by day and musician by night. He became deathly ill in October of 2001. To Keith, his positive HIV test result meant that he must have received HIV after playing the role of bottom in unprotected sex with his lover for over 4 years.
January 2001, winter all the way till like April, my life was the best it had ever been. And then all of a sudden, by spring, late spring, stuff was not looking so good. But I thought it was just from working like hard. I was just a mess from having full-blown AIDS or whatever. I was anemic, low blood. I was couldn't get off the couch. I would stand up to go to the bathroom. I couldn't make it 10 steps before I had to crawl the rest of the way into the bathroom. November 2001 all the way to June 2009, I took this basic HIV meds, which was a protease inhibitor with AZT. It was a cocktail of some other stuff. But by summer 2008, found out about Truth Calkins at Erewhon, a guy that works at the Tonic Bar. I took a consultation with him.
I think Keith saw me online from some of the longevity work that I have done. He came down to the Tonic Bar a few hours from where he lives up in the mountains, where I work in Hollywood.
The HIV meds that they have been doing for the last 10 plus years, it's a short-term solution. It deals with the symptom. It's not dealing with what's wrong. And what I'm doing differently now that I feel I'm going to have success with is dealing with it at the root.
He expressed his desire to learn everything about natural healing that could help him in his condition. I introduced him to the body ecology diet philosophy. I've used it for 10 years with great success for myself, and I've used it as a cornerstone in my programs for everybody, especially anybody who is trying to live or heal from a systemic autoimmune infection of any kind, be it a parasite infection or viral or fungus.
Keith's mentor, Truth Calkins, claims to have had success with other AIDS patients using medicinal mushrooms.
In the world of the body ecology diet, all sugar feeds disease. 2010, after I'd been off meds for 6 months, and I'd done tons and tons of protocols of getting healthier, of not taking any sugar, taking medicinal mushrooms, when I was pretty sure that I was beating the disease. I went to a place called Out of the Closet. It's on Hollywood or somewhere that does free testing, and I got a negative test.
It's a mystery why Keith McGrew became so sick if it weren't for HIV. But he was able to test HIV negative after having already come down with what was considered full-blown AIDS. Doctors in the mainstream don't believe in alternative natural cures for HIV. They do believe in the HIV test's accuracy. Was Keith able to rid his own body of HIV, or did he have a false positive result on the HIV antibody test to begin with?
They can get the virus, the viral load down to undetectable. That doesn't, the client should still have antibodies to HIV in their system, and that's what we're looking for.
I think it's a false negative. It just doesn't sound right, doesn't make sense to me.
There's no false negatives.
Any test has a lab error.
I have seen other AIDS patients come into the store where I work, and they're working with a doctor, and we have a little talk, and I share the mushrooms with them because I know a lot of science about the mushroom science products of those mushrooms. I put 4 capsules of maitake mushroom and agaricus and cordyceps and reishi 161 from Mushroom Science. Just throw the capsules into a hot cup of Gynostoma tea from Dragon Herbs, and they have this drink. This man came back to me and said his T cells more than doubled in 2 weeks, and his doctor was shocked because he didn't think there's anything in the realm of natural supplements that could do that.
There are people with genetic dispositions. They have difficulty making one set of cells or another set of cells. They have, call it chi if you want, they have lower chi, they have lower bodily energy, they don't eat well, they don't eat right. A lot of reasons to get sick.
Emery was a truck driver, and he hauled gas and fumes and stuff, you know? So he's inhaling those fumes when they're pumping those big tanks up and washing them out and stuff. So the environment of his, just get him away for a little while. And we were thinking about doing that, you know?
I knew of about 6 people that were friends of mine and acquaintances that tried to do herbal and natural approaches to treating HIV, and you know, and they're dead. They're all dead from you know, AIDS-related complications.
She eats a little bit of sugar. She's very susceptible. She gets thrush in the mouth and this and that. She unbalances her gut flora. She starts developing thrush, having candida problems. If you have these powerful antibiotics, these powerful antifungals in those pills that you're taking every day, what are you doing? You're putting a shield over yourself. You have no immune system, but those pills that you're taking are acting as your immune system. So when you stop taking these pills, your body starts unsuppressing what was suppressed, and then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. And I think that's probably what happened to her.
When I went off the medications to grow the virus back for 5 weeks, I was very, very ill. And then when I had a virus to detect, the genotype blood test was taken, and it informed the doctor on what medications would work or no longer work for me.
Most of the immune system is located in your gut because we have these beneficial bacteria that balance out the bad bacteria and the fungi that we have in our body. So probiotics are really necessary because they tend to keep the bad stuff lower, and then they'll cause you a problem. Here, let's see how this is fermenting nice.
This is 2 of the other medications that I put myself on immediately after coming off the other meds. And I guess I should have said that earlier. When I came off the other ones, I had these. They were in the bottles, but the seals went off because I was contemplating, oh, should I take these mushrooms? I thought that was a fungus. You know, how can it, you know, really help? And once I start to read upon it and the understanding, I guess, the biochemistry behind it, I was like, wait a minute. That's clearly true.
I have made several attempts over the last few years to get off the drugs, and strange things have happened to me each time, which made me a little scared to give them up completely. I spent a good deal of time when I was on the triplet taking 1 pill every other day, and that did not seem to adversely affect my counts at all. So I'm actually considering to go to 1 every other day and see how that goes.
The epiphany for me was at a Rite Aid store in front of the Q-tips, and I was standing there thinking, do I want to buy a box of 50 or do I want to buy a box of 500? And I'm thinking, I'm not going to live to use all the Q-tips if I buy 500. And then it dawned on me, what am I thinking? Buy the 500, and then, so ever since I've been buying in bulk because I know I'm going to use them.
I am definitely spiritual. I do have a higher being, and I do believe that he sent Emery to me for the purpose of, to come off those medications, because I prayed about coming off of them. I prayed about being cured, and I didn't want to be on those meds for a while, and he just happened to send Emery to me. I think that we all meet each other for a reason, and I clearly believe, as much as I loved Emery, the ultimate goal of our meeting was for me to come off those medications.
After re-examining HIV science and considering the dissident argument, the question remains whether HIV is a real virus that destroys the immune system, or if mainstream HIV theory is just a crutch holding up a hypothesis with a myriad of contradictions, one that could crumble if poked at enough different times from enough different angles. Patients' choices, like whether they should take pharmaceutical drugs or treat themselves naturally, are not always black and white. They should be given all the necessary information to decide for themselves what they need to do if they have immune deficiencies that are classified as AIDS. The mainstream won't want you to know that there's another way to look at the history and how AIDS came to be blamed on a retrovirus. The mainstream say it's too dangerous to deprive anybody of life-saving medications, but they ignore the numbers of people who died from their toxicity. With all the changes in the definition of AIDS over the years, more and more people have been classified as having AIDS with less and less justification for doing so. Regardless of what the establishment insists, it is difficult to know who was really sick or who has simply been misdiagnosed. Mainstream scientists admit that there's still a lot about HIV science that is yet to be explained, but they won't seriously consider any evidence against the HIV hypothesis. The science is available for everyone to examine and make up their own mind. The uncensored history of AIDS is out there for us if we just look hard enough.